أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم واذكر في الكتاب إبراهيم إنه كان صديقا نبيا إذ قال لأبيه يا أبت لم تعبد ما لا يسمع ولا يبصر ولا يغني عنك شيئا يا أبت إني قد جاءني من العلم ما لم يأتك فاتبعني أهدك صراطا سويا يا أبت لا تعبد الشيطان إن الشيطان كان للرحمن عصيا يا أبت إني أخاف أن يمسك عذاب من الرحمن فتكون للشيطان وليا
واذكر في الكتاب مريم إذ انتبذت من أهلها مكانا شرقيا
إنما يسرناه بلسانك لتبشر به المتقين وتنذر به قوما لدا
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. الحمد لله حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده، وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا كريم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. رب زدني علما رب زدني علما رب زدني علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. Welcome all to another episode of Embracing Quran as we continue to discuss the Tafsir of Surah Maryam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in relation to the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ إِبْرَاهِيم. Remember in the book the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Now notice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala started off other stories in this particular surah as well with the same sort of mention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala started off right in the beginning, ذِكْرُ رَحْمَةِ رَبِّكَ عَبْدَهُ زَكَرِيَّا, the mention of your Lord, of his slave when it comes to Zakaria alayhi salam. So similarly, throughout the story, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the same methodology in mentioning each story, where every time a new story starts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ Ibrahim. Just at the bottom of the page, Allah will say, وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ Musa. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us now of the story of Ibrahim. And every time we look at any of these stories, remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not necessarily speaking about the story in terms of the chronology of the story, in terms of the sequence of events that occurred within the story. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning the story simply to take benefit and derive rulings from this particular story, and none of the surahs in the Quran accommodate a complete story, perhaps with the exception of Surah Yusuf, which pretty much accommodates a number of the grand events that occurred in the life of Yusuf alayhi salam, right? But other than that, we'll notice that none of the stories are brought within the Quran chronologically, rather they're separated as well. So we have the story of Musa dispersed all over the Quran. Even Ibrahim alayhi salam, his story is in more than one place. Even Surah Maryam, despite the fact that it happens to be an entire surah named after her, there is the story of Maryam in here. There's the story, portions of the story of Maryam in Surah Al-Anbiya. There's portions of the story of Maryam so far forth in other surahs as well. Similarly, the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam also has a surah named after him, but nonetheless, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ Ibrahim. Remember in the book Ibrahim alayhi salam. Book meaning the Quran, or just Surah Maryam. These are the two ways to understand it. But I think that the Quran is what this is referring to. Why? Because the Quran accommodates, and within it is also Surah Maryam as well. So this is more general, and it's more accommodating of both opinions in reality. وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ Ibrahim. Remember in the book Ibrahim alayhi salam. إِنَّهُ كَانَ صِدِّيقًا نَبِيًّا. Ibrahim, Abul Anbiya, right? And he's also the person who the Abu al-Arab as well. He's the father of all the Arabs as well, because the Arabs were basically from the progeny of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And hence, Ibrahim alayhi salam is a person that the Arabs used to recognize. They used to recognize the station to a degree that they had pictures of Ibrahim alayhi salam within the Kaaba as well. And so they used to recognize the status of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And for that reason, the mention of the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam is very, very powerful in terms of addressing the Arabs, the early Arabs, that is. وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ. Remember the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. But one may say, hey, what is the reason for the mention of the story of Ibrahim after the story of Maryam alayhi salam? Well, we said the first story that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned is the story of Zakaria. Thereafter, as an offshoot of the stories, Yahya alayhi salam. Similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the story of Maryam alayhi salam, and then right after that, Isa alayhi salam. Now, that story, Maryam alayhi salam, also Isa alayhi salam, even before that, Zakaria and Yahya, because they're all around the same time, right? That story was dealing with the phenomenon of people worshipping other than Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal, and people associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in certain ways. And this story has another way of associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is people taking up idols. Okay? That was a corrupt understanding of God. That was also associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but this is also a form of association of partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of it is shirk. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from polytheism. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. But nonetheless, that is the thread that sort of connects these two stories. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ. Remember in the book, Ibrahim alayhi salam. إِنَّهُ كَانَ صِدِّيقًا نَبِيًّا. Indeed, Ibrahim alayhi salam happened to be a siddiq. He happened to be a siddiq, a truthful individual. Okay? And siddiq is basically صيغة مبالغة from the word sidq. It's an exaggerated form of the word truth. Okay? Truthful person. Sadiq. And then Siddiq, a person who's very, 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 very truthful. Not just a little bit truthful. Every single thing he does is truthful. And right after the quality of truthfulness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings the quality of prophethood. Now one of the things that's unique about this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings the quality of sidq first, and then He brings the quality of prophethood, right? And that is very, very powerful. And that is to say that it is the truthfulness that allowed Ibrahim alayhi salam to be the prophethood, to be a prophet. And similarly, the prophet was a Sadiq al-Amin. He was the truthful person, the trustworthy person, and that is what led Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course His wisdom is beyond that, but that is one of the reasons why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had been chosen to be a prophet, because he was a truthful individual. And so anyone that wishes to deliver the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, anyone who wishes to deliver the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the primary qualities that they have to exhibit, and they have to take within themselves and make it part of themselves is sidq, is truthfulness. Why? Because Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, إِنَّ الصِّدْقَ يَهْدِي إِلَى الْبِرِّ وَإِنَّ الْبِرَّ يَهْدِي إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. That indeed, sidq leads us to all sorts of goodness, and goodness leads us to Jannah. So it was the sidq and the truthfulness of Ibrahim alayhi salam which made him a prophet. Similarly, it was the truthfulness of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam which allowed for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to choose him, which basically nominated him to be a choice for the prophethood for the rest of time. So it is truthfulness that leads us to be leaders. It is truthfulness that leads us to be people who can be torchbearers of the call and the legacy of the prophets. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّهُ كَانَ صِدِّيقًا نَبِيًّا. Indeed, he was Siddiq. Indeed, he was ever truthful. And he was also a Nabiyya. He was also a prophet of Allah, Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal. إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ يَا أَبَتِ لِمَ تَعْبُدُ مَا لَا يَسْمَعُ. You know, if it wasn't for truthfulness, then a person wouldn't actually be allowed to take up the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why is that? Because if a person is being a liar in matters other than the deen, how can we then trust the person in the religion? And this, by the way, is a very, very important matter. And that is that if you see a person lying, bluntly, literally, bluntly lying through their teeth, you can never trust them any longer when it comes to religion. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made all of His prophets Siddiqeen. All of His prophets were people who were truthful people. Every single one of them. Because if you're lying outside of the religion, how would I then know that you're not lying within the religion as well? So truthfulness is a necessary component and quality. Why is that? Because you're basically signing off on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and lying is actually a quality of a coward. That's a reality, right? Think with me for a second. You see, a person who's brave, he doesn't have a reason to lie. Meaning, because he's brave, he's always ready to face the consequences of whatever is happening within his life. However, someone who isn't brave, someone who's weak, every single time he's faced by something within his life, immediately he tries to take himself out of that situation by lying. And to deliver the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is components of bravery that are required, because there are things within the Qur'an, within the Sunnah, that society will just not like, no matter what we do, unless it's a society which abides by the laws of Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal. So if a person does not understand that, and he is not truthful, and he has that quality of weakness within him, then naturally every single time he or she is placed within a corner in which if he says something, or she says something, there will be consequences. The bravery will not be there in order for him to tell the truth, and hence a lie might come out. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, speaking of Ibrahim alayhi salam, said, إِنَّهُ كَانَ صِدِّيقًا نَبِيًّا. Indeed, Ibrahim alayhi salam was a Siddiq. He was a very truthful person, and thereafter he was also a prophet as well. إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ يَا أَبَتِ لِمَ تَعْبُدُ مَا لَا يَسْمَعُ وَلَا يُبْصِرُ. As he said to his father, Ya abati, O my father, لِمَ تَعْبُدُ مَا لَا يَسْمَعُ وَلَا يُبْصِرُ. Why are you worshipping someone who neither hears you, neither does he see you as well, وَلَا يُغْنِي عَنْكَ شَيْئًا, nor can he suffice you in any which way? O my father. So look at how beautifully Ibrahim alayhi salam speaks to his father. You know, in some of these ayat in which Ibrahim alayhi salam is discussing and addressing his father, there's so much wisdom to be found within these ayat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us these stories of Isa alayhi salam being kind to her mother, and mentioning of that as well. وَبَرًّا بِوَالِدَتِي وَلَمْ يَجْعَلْنِي جَبَّارًا شَقِيًّا. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made me bar. Allah made me dutiful to my mother, and He did not make me tyrannical, nor did He make me miserable as well, right? So Allah is giving us a story of a pious child, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us now another story of a pious child. Why? So one of them to his mother and the other one to the father. Why? So we may take lessons and heed on how to treat our parents as well. As we continue to discuss the story of Surah Maryam, please join us again in the second segment of this episode. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
كتاب أنزلناه إليك مبارك ليدبروا آياته وليتذكر أولو الألباب. كتاب أنزلناه إليك مبارك ليدبروا آياته وليتذكر أولو الألباب.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. الحمد لله حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده، وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا كريم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. رب زدني علما رب زدني علما رب زدني علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. Welcome back everyone to the second segment of this episode, as we continue to discuss the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam from Surah Maryam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in ayah number 43, Ya abati inni qad ja'ani min al-ilm. Allah is quoting Ibrahim alayhi salam. He says that إذ قال لأبيه يا أبتي. Ayah number 42. He says إذ قال لأبيه يا أبتي لما تعبد ما لا يسمع ولا يبصر ولا يغني عنك شيئا. Why are you worshipping someone who neither can hear, nor can they see, neither can they suffice you of anything in any way? Okay? So Ibrahim alayhi salam, if you notice, he's doing a couple of things with his father. He's calling his father out in a very beautiful way. He's basically expressing love and compassion, and the type of love that a son has towards his father, the type of respect that a father is deserving of. Even though this father is a father who doesn't worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't worship except the idols that he has chosen to worship now, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us that even though his father is worshipping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though his father is worshipping idols and so forth, Ibrahim alayhi salam still uses a very respectful, polite and generous tone when he speaks to him. He says, Ya abati, oh my father. You see, normally when you want to say, oh my father, you would say, Ya abi. Or you would say abi by itself, right? But when you say abi, you're saying, oh my father. You're saying my father, that's it. And then when you add to that, Ya abi, oh my father, then it becomes a more generous tone and respectful tone when it comes to your father. But now, when you add to that another thing, when you say Ya abati, not just Ya abi, that becomes, oh my dear father. So literally, Ibrahim alayhi salam is trying to be as polite and respectful and as basically as much as a son can do in terms of conversation. When you're calling out and addressing your father, that's how Ibrahim is speaking to his father, despite the fact that his father is not worshipping Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal. So he says, Ya abati, oh my father, not just oh my father, oh my dear father. Ya abati, lima ta'budu, ma la yasma'u wa la yubsir. Why are you worshipping someone who doesn't see and doesn't hear, and he can't suffice you in any which way, right? Now even this question that he's asking, do you see the wisdom of Ibrahim alayhi salam in this question that he's asking? Right? He's basically trying to refute his father and refute the act of worship that his father does. He's trying to stop and put a halt to the worship that his father does to other than Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal. That's what he's trying to do. But instead of telling him to stop, instead of basically, mocking and ridiculing his idols and so forth and his act of worship, rather he puts it in a question, right? Why are you worshipping someone who cannot hear, someone who cannot see, and someone who cannot suffice you in any way? But along with the question, he does another thing. Along with the question, he gives his father all the possible reasons that a person may have to consider someone a Lord or a God, okay? Now what I mean by that is, if you hear, you see, and you are capable of something, meaning you're capable of sufficing someone in some way, giving money to someone and so on and so forth, then at least you have some form of supremacy over them, right? Even though everyone knows in this world that no matter how supreme you become, so long as you're a human being, you're still in need because you're going to die, you need to use the bathroom, you need to, defecate, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honor you and grace you, right? You need to do all of those things, right? But even then, the person is still in need, okay? So even if a person has all of these qualities of seeing, hearing, all of these qualities of sufficing, and so on and so forth, you still are in need of Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal. But at least in that circumstance, where someone has those qualities, at least, it doesn't make sense, but at least you can explain it away in some way, right? The person can say, he hears me, he sees me, perhaps he has a camera on top of my head, and so on and so forth. He says, this particular idol that you worship, he doesn't even have those qualities for which we can use as lousy excuses for the worship of someone, right? Because even if those excuses were to be there, they would still be lousy excuses. So he says he doesn't even have those qualities. How about having the quality of lordship he doesn't have those to begin with. How about the qualities of lordship? He definitely doesn't have those. But he puts it in a question form. Why? Because were he to tell him stop, then of course he will have to explain himself. And that would be too direct, especially coming from a son to a father. When he asks him a question, and in the question he places all the reasons why his father shouldn't be worshipping this particular idol of his, he ends up giving him, one, the hint that he's not happy with that worship and that worship shouldn't be occurring. Two, all of the reasons why that worship shouldn't be occurring. So he continues, and he says that, Ya abati, O my father, inni qad ja'ani min al-ilm. O my father, a certain knowledge has come to me. ما لم يأتك فاتبعني أهدك صراطا سويا. A knowledge has come to me, O my father, a type of knowledge that you yourself haven't gotten, right? But even when he's speaking to his father with this particular word, which is perhaps very heavy for a son to say to his father, I have some information that you don't have. Notice that people that are older, they always think that the younger people don't know, right? That's the reality. And the people that are younger also, as they're young and blinded by all the strength that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them, they also feel the elderly, they don't know as well, right? So he doesn't go in a direction which is going to irritate that feeling within his father. Instead he said, Ya abati, oh my dear father. He repeated that statement again. Another very polite way to address his father, Ibrahim alayhi salam. Inni qad ja'ani min al-ilm. I have been granted from knowledge. It's not like I've been granted all of knowledge. I've only been granted from knowledge. مَا لَمْ يَأْتِكَ. You have a lot more knowledge than me and other things. That's basically what he's trying to say subtly, right? So he's making a statement in a way where it's politically correct when you're speaking to a father or someone who's older than you. I have been granted knowledge, from knowledge, not all knowledge, not loads of knowledge. From knowledge, something I learned that perhaps you don't know. مَا لَمْ يَأْتِكَ فَاتَّبِعْنِي أَهْدِكَ صِرَاطًا سَوِيًّا. Then since you don't know that piece of information specifically, why don't you follow me so that I can guide you to the correct and the straight path and the path that leads to Jannah bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Now one of the things that I want to stop at over here in this ayah is the fact that notice the humility of Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? He is a prophet who's been given prophethood. He's a person who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen. He's a person for whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a lisan al-sidq. He made a very, very great mention for him. Throughout the centuries, till today, when we say Ibrahim alayhi salam, all three major religions in the world, they end up and hold arms in that particular regard. Abrahamic faiths, right? So Ibrahim alayhi salam has a great status within the world, and this great man, he recognizes that he is not a person who's encompassed all knowledge, so he very humbly speaks when he's talking about the knowledge that he's been granted, saying, Inni qad ja'ani min al-ilm. I have been granted from knowledge. And this is a lesson for all of us to take, especially in a time where many a times people read perhaps a book or two or three, or perhaps just memorize a few surahs from the Qur'an, a few ahadith here, a few lines of poetry here or something like that, and then they feel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them all the knowledge in the world, and then they start to look down upon some of the great luminaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had brought within this ummah. And sometimes this also leads to what? This also leads to uquq al-walidain. Being very, very mean and nasty to your parents, being evil to your parents, and not being dutiful to the parents. Ibrahim alayhi salam, he has gotten knowledge, and that knowledge is definite knowledge. It's no joke. That is a knowledge that Ibrahim alayhi salam is sure of, because it's coming from where? It's coming from Allah Rabbul Izzati wal Jalal. Even though that knowledge is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ibrahim alayhi salam is still speaking in a very polite tone. I have gotten knowledge. Ja'ani min al-ilm. Ma lam ya'tik. Some knowledge. Min al-ilm. From knowledge. So this is a call for humility, right? It's a serious matter when we speak on behalf of Allah without knowledge, to a degree that the Prophet ﷺ, he had said to one of the companions, who ended up bringing the sad story of another companion whose head was injured, okay? His head was injured as they were traveling. And he had to make ghusl, he had to take a ritual bath from janaba, which is major state of ritual impurity. As he was in that major state of ritual impurity, he had to take a shower, and he couldn't do that because he thought, if the water touches my head, I might die. And so he went to the other companions and said, do you have an excuse for me? Is there something else I can do? So they said, we don't find any excuses for you, I have to take a shower. He took a shower, and then because of that shower, he literally ended up dying. He literally ended up dying. So when they came back to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, he was angry, very, very angry. And he said, قَتَلُوهُ. They have killed him. قَاتَلَهُمُ اللَّهِ. May Allah go to war with them. إِنَّمَا شِفَاءُ الْعِيِّ السُّؤَالِ. Indeed, the cure of ignorance is that you ask a question, right? So Ibrahim alayhi salam is showing us that humility that we need in order for us to proceed. So just because we read a book or two, or read a few ayat, or learned the tafsir of a few ayat, or perhaps just memorized a few ayat or a hadith, this doesn't mean that it gives us an authority or a power, or perhaps we even have a degree in Islamic studies or this or that. We suddenly have an authority to go and challenge the luminaries of the ummah who had served the deen day and night. And that's why some of the Salaf, they used to say that أبيت سهران الدجى وتبيته نوما وتبغي بعد ذاك لحاقي. That am I to stay up all night in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, looking through the knowledge and the books and the hadith and the Quran. I'm up all night and you end up sleeping all night and then you want to be similar to me? That is definitely not going to be the case. Wallahi, we have to respect our pious predecessors. Jazakumullahu khairan for listening as we continue to go through the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam from Surah Maryam. Please join us in the next episode. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
واذكر في الكتاب مريم إذ انتبذت من أهلها مكانا شرقيا
وهزي إليك بجذع النخلة تساقط عليك رطبا جنيا
فإنما يسرناه بلسانك لتبشر به المتقين وتنذر به قوما لدا